there's a profound difference between courage and recklessness, a thin line that separates those who choose to fight from those who simply don't know when to stop. Valentina Russo had crossed that line the moment her hand met Dante Moretti's face, the moment the slap echoed through the silence of that room full of armed men, the moment she looked into the eyes of the most dangerous man in Naples and didn't look away. It wasn't courage. Not really. It was pure rage. It was denied justice. It was the desperation of someone who has nothing left to lose. And when Dante had smiled, that slow and dangerous smile that didn't reach his black eyes, when he'd said in a low voice that made the foundations of the room tremble those words that would change everything. "You'll sleep in my bed tonight," Valentina understood she had just made either the biggest mistake or the bravest choice of her life. Sometimes the difference between the two only becomes clear when it's too late to turn back. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The Inferno Club was exactly what its name suggested, an underground kingdom of sin and power in the heart of the Spanish Quarter in Naples. The walls were exposed brick painted black. The soft lighting came from red lamps that cast dancing shadows. The music was a dull beat that pulsed like a sick heart. It was the kind of place where dangerous men did even more dangerous business, where money changed hands, along with promises that often ended with blood on the floor. Valentina should never have been there. At 24, an elementary school teacher with an orderly life in a respectable neighborhood, her world never intersected with places like this. But desperation takes you to places you never imagined, makes you do things you thought impossible. And Valentina was desperate. Her brother Marco, 19 years old, stupid and young, and convinced he was invincible, had done something unforgivable. He had stolen 50,000 euros from Dante Moretti. Not directly, obviously. Marco wasn't brave or stupid enough for that. He had stolen from one of the establishments that paid protection to Moretti, thinking that if the theft looked like a random robbery, no one would connect it to him. But Moretti knew everything that happened in his territory. Every euro that moved, every whisper in the streets, every petty crime. And he had sent his men to get Marco. Valentina had received the call 3 days ago. A voice she didn't recognize, calm and professional, telling her that her brother had a debt, that he had a week to pay the 50,000 euros plus interest, or Marco would be found in the Bay of Naples. It wasn't an empty threat. Everyone knew the stories about Dante Moretti, the man who had taken control of the Neapolitan Camorra at 28 after his father was murdered, the man who had consolidated power with a combination of brutal intelligence and calculated violence. The man no one dared challenge because those who did simply disappeared. Valentina had spent 3 days in frantic panic trying to raise the money. She had emptied every bank account, sold every piece of jewelry she owned, begged loans from friends and relatives without explaining why. But she had only collected 18,000 euros. It wasn't even close to enough. So she had done the only thing she could. She had gone directly to the source. She had found out where Moretti did business, had waited outside the Inferno Club all evening, and when they finally let her in after she begged the guards at the door, she had walked through that room full of criminals with her back straight and her head high, even though her heart was beating so hard she thought it might explode. Dante Moretti sat at a table in the farthest corner, a position that gave him a view of the entire room, that allowed him to see every entrance and exit. He was surrounded by men, all dressed in dark suits, all with the telltale bulge of weapons under their jackets. But even in that crowd, Dante stood out. Not because of size, though he was tall, maybe 6'3", not because of beauty, though he was handsome in a hard and dangerous way. Strong jaw, nose that had been broken and repaired, eyes so black they seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. He stood out because of presence, because of the way everyone else in the room seemed to orbit around him, like satellites around a dark planet, Valentina had crossed the room, ignoring the stares of the men, ignoring the whispers that followed her. When she reached Moretti's table, the bodyguards had moved to block her, but Dante had raised a hand, stopping them. His eyes had studied her, slow and deliberate, starting from her feet in sensible flats, moving up her legs covered by simple jeans, lingering on her white blouse buttoned to the neck, finally reaching her face. "You're Valentina Russo," he had said, not a question but a statement. "Marco's sister." "Yes," Valentina had said, forcing her voice to remain steady even though her hands were shaking. "I came to talk about my brother." Dante had gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit." It wasn't an invitation but an order. Valentina had sat, aware that every man in the room was watching her, judging, measuring. Dante had poured a glass of whiskey from an expensive bottle on the table, pushed it toward her. "Drink," he had said. "You look like you need it." Valentina had taken the glass with hands. She tried to stop from trembling and drank. The liquor had burned her throat, but it had also centered her, given her a moment to collect her thoughts. "Your brother stole from me," Dante had said, leaning back in his chair, fingers playing with his own glass. 50,000 euros. Plus accumulated interest. The total is now 60,000. "I know," Valentina had said, "and that's why I'm here. I want to negotiate." Something had flashed in Dante's eyes. It might have been amusement, or it might have been irritation. "Negotiate," he had repeated. "And what do you have to offer? That's worth 60,000 euros. Valentina had pulled the envelope from her bag, placed it on the table. 18,000 euros, she had said. "It's all I could raise. It's a start." Dante hadn't touched the envelope. 18 out of 60, he had said. Not even a third. And the rest? "I'll earn it," Valentina had said, though she had no idea how I'll work, take loans, sell everything. "But I need time. And I need you to leave my brother alone while I do it." Dante had studied her for a long moment. "Why should I agree to this?" he had asked. "Because if you kill my brother, you'll never see another euro," Valentina had said, anger suddenly overtaking fear. "And because you know 18 is better than 0. A small, dangerous smile had appeared on Dante's face. "Brave," he had said. "Or stupid. I haven't decided which yet." One of his men had leaned down, whispered something in Dante's ear. Dante's face had darkened. "Stand up," he had ordered Valentina. "What?" "Stand up and turn around," he had said, his voice now cold. Valentina had stood slowly, confused. Dante had nodded to one of his men, who had walked behind her. A moment later, she had felt hands patting her down, rough and efficient. He was looking for weapons, recorders, anything. When the man had finished, he had shaken his head toward Dante. "Clean." Dante had stood, come around the table. He was tall, much taller than her, and as he stood before Valentina, she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You know what I think?" he had said, voice low. "Dangerous. I think your brother sent you here. I think this is a distraction while he runs, or a pathetic attempt to soften me up with a pretty face." "No," Valentina had said, anger rising. "Marco doesn't even know I'm here. He thought he could protect himself by hiding. But I'm not that stupid. I know who you are. I know what you can do. So I came to make an honest deal." Dante had reached out suddenly and grabbed her chin, holding her face still as he studied it. The touch had been surprisingly gentle, but the underlying threat was clear. "An honest deal," he had repeated, "from someone whose family stole from me. From someone who thinks they can walk into my club and dictate terms." And then it happened. Maybe it was the fear that had finally transformed into anger. Maybe it was the frustration of 3 days of panic. Maybe it was just that Valentina Russo had never been good at staying quiet when someone treated her like she was nothing. Before she could think, Before she could stop herself, her hand had flown, and the slap had resonated through the club like a gunshot. The silence that followed had been absolute. The music still played, but it seemed distant, irrelevant. Every conversation had died. Every man in the room had frozen, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. Dante had turned his head from the force of the slap, a red mark blooming on his cheek. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity. He didn't move. Then, slowly, he had turned back to look at her, and he had smiled. It wasn't a warm or friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found something interesting, something worth playing with before killing. "No one has ever hit me before," he had said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Certainly not a woman. Certainly not in my own club in front of my men." "I'm sorry," Valentina had said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. The words had come out automatically. Dante had laughed, a low sound without humor. Too late for apologies. "Beautiful," he had said. "You just did something very dangerous. Now I have to respond. Otherwise I look weak, and I can't allow that terror had finally cut through Valentina's adrenaline." "What are you going to do?" she had whispered. Dante had moved closer, so close she could smell his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. He had leaned down until his lips were almost at her ear. "You'll sleep in my bed tonight," he had whispered. "And tomorrow we'll decide what to do with you and your brother." Before Valentina could respond, before she could process what he had just said, Dante had gestured to two of his men. "Take her to the car," he had ordered, "and make sure Marco Russo is found by morning. I don't want him running, now that we have something he loves." The two men had grabbed Valentina's arms, not brutally but firmly enough that resisting would be useless. "Wait," Valentina had said, panic rising. "What do you mean? What will you do to my brother?" Dante had already turned away, returning to his table. "Depends on how cooperative you are," he had said without looking at her. "Now go. I still have business to finish here." Valentina had been dragged out of the club and into the humid Naples night. The air stank of sea and garbage. The sounds of the city at night surrounded her. Scooters whizzing by, voices shouting. Life continuing unaware that her world had just completely collapsed. A sleek black Mercedes waited at the curb, the engine purring quietly. One of the men had opened the back door, pushed Valentina inside. The interior was luxury, soft leather and polished wood, but it felt like a coffin. The man had slid in next to her, the other going to the front seat. "Where are you taking me?" Valentina had asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "To Don Moretti's house," the man next to her had said, his voice neutral. "As ordered." Dante Moretti's house was in Posillipo, the wealthy neighborhood that looked over the Bay of Naples from dramatic cliffs. It was a modern villa, all glass and white stone, hidden behind high walls and security gates that opened automatically as they approached. The drive had lasted 20 minutes through the winding streets of Naples, and Valentina had spent every second trying to figure out a plan, a way to escape, something. But there were two armed men in the car, walls and gates ahead, and even if she escaped, what then? Dante would still have Marco. The villa inside was stunning. She had to admit, open spaces with high ceilings, marble floors, modern furniture that balanced comfort and aesthetics. But what struck Valentina most were the books, entire shelves lining the walls, collections that suggested someone who actually read, not just displayed. "The lady will wait in the master suite," one of the men had said to a middle-aged woman wearing an apron. "Maria, make sure she has everything she needs." The woman, Maria, had nodded, assessing Valentina with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked. "Come, dear," she had said, her Neapolitan accent thick but kind. "I'll show you your room." The master suite was on the second floor, an enormous room with a king-size bed that could easily hold 4 people. Floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a balcony with views of the bay. Everywhere. Valentina looked, screamed wealth, from the marble bathroom to the walk-in closet that was bigger than her entire bedroom at home. "The bathroom is there," Maria had said, pointing. "There's a robe, fresh towels, toiletries. If you're hungry, the kitchen is always open. Just use the intercom." Valentina had turned to Maria, desperate for answers. "What does he want from me?" she had asked. "Really?" Maria had looked at her with something that might have been pity. "It's not my place to say, dear," she had replied, "but I can tell you this. Don Moretti is not the man people think he is. He can be dangerous, yes, but he can also be fair. If you're honest with him, he might be honest with you." Before Valentina could ask more, Maria had left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Valentina had heard the lock not turn, but when she tried the handle, she found the door was open. She wasn't imprisoned, not technically, but where could she go? She had spent the next hour exploring the suite like a caged animal, looking for something, anything that might help. She had found the closet full of expensive men's clothes, all tailored, all in dark tones. The bathroom had masculine toiletries, expensive and minimal. And on the nightstand, she had found a book, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, with a bookmark halfway through. So he read classic Russian literature, so he was a criminal who read about crime and redemption. The irony wasn't lost on Valentina. It was almost 3 a.m. when she heard the door open. Valentina had frozen where she stood, on the balcony, looking out over the sleeping city below her. She had heard footsteps cross the room, heavy, deliberate. "You weren't supposed to still be awake," Dante's voice had said behind her. Valentina hadn't turned around. "How could I sleep?" she had asked, her voice bitter. "I'm in the house of a man who will probably kill me tomorrow." Dante had come out onto the balcony, stopping beside her at the railing. In the soft light coming from the room behind them, Valentina could see he had removed his jacket, loosened his tie, rolled up his shirt sleeves. He looked more human this way, less the terrifying boss, and more just a tired man. "If I wanted to kill you," he had said, "you'd already be dead. I wouldn't have brought you to my home, to my bed." "Then what do you want from me?" Valentina had asked, finally turning to look at him. Dante had been silent for a long moment, his eyes on the city instead of her. "I don't know yet," he had finally admitted, and his honesty had surprised her. "You hit me in front of my men. I should do something horrible to you for that. Send a message that I'm not weak, that I'm not someone to challenge. But there was something about the way you did it, something in your eyes when you looked at me afterward. Not fear, not exactly. It was. It was what?" Valentina had insisted contempt, Dante had said, a small smile touching his lips. "You looked at me like I was a monster you had to confront instead of a man to fear. And no one has looked at me like that in a very long time. Most people see me as you said, as the boss, as the power, as the fear. But you saw me as just a man who deserved to be slapped." Valentina really looked at him for the first time, seeing beyond the aura of danger. He was young, she realized, maybe 32 or 33, and in his eyes, behind the hardness, there was something that looked like weariness, maybe even loneliness. "You are a monster," Valentina said, but her voice lacked its previous conviction. "Yes," Dante agreed simply. "I am. I'm responsible for things that would make you vomit if you knew them. I've given orders that ended lives. I've hurt people who crossed me. I've built an empire on fear and blood. I don't deny it." "Then why do it?" Valentina asked. "Why not choose something different?" Dante laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Choice," he said. "You think I had a choice? My father was Don Moretti before me. I grew up in this world. I learned this business from age 5. When my father was killed when I was 28, I had 2 options: take his place, or watch everything collapse. Watch our enemies take control. Watch everyone loyal to my family be massacred. So I chose. I took power. I consolidated control. I did what had to be done. And now I'm trapped, he had continued, his hands gripping the railing, because if I try to leave, if I try to be something else, I'll look weak. And weakness in this world is a death sentence. There's always someone waiting to take your place. Always someone ready to betray you. So I continue. I play the role. I'm the monster. Because it's the only way to survive. Valentina felt something soften in her chest. Was it pity? Understanding? She wasn't sure. But suddenly she saw Dante Moretti, not just as the criminal threatening her brother, but as a man trapped by expectations, by the necessities of his position. Your brother, Dante said, changing the subject. We found him. He was hiding in his girlfriend's apartment. Valentina felt her heart sink. What did you do to him? Nothing, Dante said. Yet. He's in one of my properties under surveillance. Safe as long as you cooperate. Cooperate how? Valentina asked. What exactly do you want from me? Dante finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. Honesty, he said. I want you to be honest with me in a way no one ever is. I want conversation without political calculation. I want someone who sees me as a man instead of a position. It might sound stupid. It might sound weak. But that's the truth. What about sleeping in your bed? Valentina asked, her heart beating faster. Dante had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. That was for my men, he admitted. I had to seem to take something from you after the slap. I had to seem in control. But I'm not. I'm not the kind of man who forces women. If you sleep in my bed, it will be your choice. Where will you sleep? Valentina asked. There are other rooms, Dante said. This is my master suite, but I can sleep in one of the guest rooms. No, Valentina said, surprising them both. The bed is big enough, and if I have to be here, if I have to trust you'll keep my brother safe, then maybe we should start with honesty. We can share the space without sex, Dante said bluntly. Yes, we can. I'm not an animal, Valentina. I'm just a man who's very lonely and very tired. That first night, they slept in the same bed, but separated by space and understanding. Dante had stayed on top of the covers, fully dressed, not wanting to make her feel threatened. Valentina had slipped under the sheets, emotionally and physically exhausted, but couldn't sleep. Why did you really hit me? Dante asked in the darkness, hours after they had laid down. Because you grabbed my face, Valentina said, like you had the right to touch me, to treat me like an object. And I'm so tired of men who think power gives them the right to women's bodies. Even if you're a criminal, even if you have every reason to be angry with my family, you don't have the right to touch me like that. You're right, Dante said quietly. And I'm sorry. I didn't even realize I was doing it. It's so automatic, being intimidating, being in control, but it's no excuse. They finally fell asleep at dawn, two strangers sharing a space, beginning something neither of them understood yet. The days that followed established a strange routine. Valentina stayed in the villa, technically free to move, but aware she was always watched. Dante left every morning for his business, returned in the evening, and every evening they talked. At first the conversations were cautious, superficial, but gradually they deepened. Dante told her about his childhood, growing up in his father's palazzo, watching men come to beg for favors, about how his mother died when he was 10, killed by a rival to hurt his father, about how he learned early that loving someone made you vulnerable. That family was both your strength and your greatest weakness. Valentina told him about her life, about how their parents died when she was 20 and Marco 14, a car accident that left them orphans, about how she'd had to grow up too fast, becoming a parent to her brother while finishing university, about how Marco had been a good kid until he started hanging with the wrong people, seeking belonging and finding trouble, about how she loved him fiercely, but also wanted to shake him for his stupidity. "He wasn't trying to steal from you to be evil," Valentina said one evening. "He wanted to impress his friends. He wanted to seem tough. He's an idiot, but he's not bad." "He's young," Dante said, "and young men do stupid things trying to prove they're men. I did too. But that doesn't erase the fact that he stole from me. There have to be consequences." "I know," Valentina said. "But does it have to be death? Can't he learn another way?" Dante was silent for a long time. For most people, the answer would be yes. "Death," he said finally. "Because if you let it slide, it looks like you can be exploited. But for you, maybe I can make an exception. If he agrees to work for me for 2 years, paying back the debt through service, I can let him live. But Valentina, this means you and I need to find an agreement too." "An agreement?" Valentina asked. "Stay with me," Dante said. "Not as a prisoner, not as a forced woman, but as a companion. Someone who stays here by choice, who keeps me company, who keeps me honest. In exchange, your brother lives. His debt is forgiven after the 2 years of service, and you'll have everything you need." "I can't do this," Valentina said immediately. "I can't just come live with a Mafia boss. I have a life, a job, a reputation." "I understand," Dante said. "But think about what I'm offering. Your brother lives. You have financial security. And honestly, Valentina, in these days I've seen that you are unhappy in your job, frustrated with how little they pay teachers, with how little they value them. Here you could have opportunities. I don't know what yet, but something." "This is absurd," Valentina said. "It's dangerous and crazy, and I should say no. But you're not saying no," Dante observed. "Why?" Valentina looked at him, this man she should hate, but had instead begun to understand. "Because," she admitted, "in these days, here, I've slept better than I have in years. Because when we talk, I feel like someone really listens to me. Because you're a monster, but also a man, and the human part of you, that makes me want to stay." Dante reached across the space between them in the bed they now shared every night, found her hand, intertwined it with his fingers. "Stay," he said softly. "Try for a month. If after a month you want to leave, I'll let you go. No obligation. But give me a month to show you that this life, as complicated as it is, can also be good." Valentina squeezed his hand back, making a decision she knew would change everything. "Okay," she said. 1 month. That month became a turning point. Valentina stopped going to her apartment, stopped pretending this was temporary. Dante arranged for her to leave her teaching job with excellent references, and instead put her in charge of one of his legitimate businesses, an art gallery he had bought years ago as an investment, but never paid attention to. And slowly, inevitably, they began to fall in love. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was gradual, a deepening of connection through hundreds of small moments. Dante learning that Valentina loved coffee with too much sugar, bringing it to her in bed every morning. Valentina noticing that Dante had nightmares, holding him when he woke up sweating and shaking. Dante taking her to see Naples from his perspective, the neighborhoods he protected, the people who depended on him. Valentina challenging his decisions when she thought he was too harsh, making him consider options he'd never considered. The first kiss happened 3 weeks into that agreement. They had been on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the bay in gold and pink, and Dante had turned to her and said, "Can I kiss you?" And Valentina, who had said yes to so many impossible things, said yes to another. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, nothing like she expected from a man of violence, and when they parted, they both knew they had passed the point of no return. The first time they made love was exactly 1 month after Valentina arrived at the villa. Dante had made sure it was her choice, checking 10 times that she was sure, that she wanted it, And when they finally came together, when the barriers between them fell completely, it was revelation. Valentina discovered that Dante in intimate moments was vulnerable, almost shy, as if he didn't believe he deserved gentleness. And Dante discovered that Valentina was fierce, passionate, not intimidated by his power, but excited by the man beneath it. But it wasn't easy. There were complications, always, like the fact that Dante still did terrible things. Valentina didn't see it directly, but she knew. She saw men come to the villa injured, saw Dante return with blood on his shirts, and she had to reconcile the man who held her tenderly with the man capable of ordering violence. One night, 4 months into their relationship, she had a confrontation. A man had come to the villa, begging Dante for mercy for his son, who had betrayed the organization. Valentina had heard Dante coldly refuse, order that the son be made an example. After the man left in tears, Valentina confronted Dante. "How can you?" she asked, her voice full of anger and pain. "How can you kill someone's son so easily?" "Because if I don't," Dante said, his voice tired, 10 others will think they can betray too. And then I'll have war, blood in the streets, innocents caught in crossfire. 1 man dies, or 100 die. Which do you choose?" "Choose that no one dies," Valentina said. "Choose to find another way." "There is no other way," Dante said. "This is the world I live in. I thought you understood that." "I do understand," Valentina said, tears beginning to flow. "But understanding and accepting are different things. And I don't know if I can accept this, Dante. I don't know if I can love someone who makes these choices." "Then leave," Dante said. And there was pain in his voice, but also resignation. "I knew this would happen. I knew eventually you'd see me for what I really am and be disgusted. It's okay, Valentina. Leave. Your brother is still protected, the debt still forgiven. But leave before I make you hate yourself for loving me." Valentina looked at him, this man who had changed her, who had shown her a world she never imagined, who had given her passion and fear in equal measure. And she realized something important. "I can't change you," she said slowly. "I can't make you be something you're not. But maybe I can be the voice that challenges you, that makes you consider mercy when your instinct is punishment. I can't save you, Dante, but I can remind you that there's humanity even in darkness." Dante looked at her for a long time. "And if one day that voice isn't enough," he asked, "and if one day I do something you can't forgive, then we'll deal with that day when it comes," Valentina said. "But until then, we choose to stay. We choose to try." That night, Dante commuted the death sentence of the traitor's son to exile. It wasn't complete mercy, but it was something. And it was the first of many times that Valentina's influence tempered Dante's worst impulses. Not always. There were moments when Dante did things Valentina couldn't easily forgive. Moments when they slept separately while she processed the horror of loving a man capable of violence. But they always came back to each other, choosing connection over purity, choosing complicated love over simple loneliness. Marco, meanwhile, was serving his time working for Dante's organization. Initially furious and resentful, he slowly began to change. Dante put him to work on the legitimate side of the business, not wanting to corrupt the boy further. And Marco, exposed to real discipline and expectations, began to mature. "You've changed," Valentina told her brother during one of their weekly visits. "You've grown up. It's hard not to grow up around Don Moretti," Marco said. "He doesn't tolerate stupidity or laziness, but he's fair, in a way I didn't expect. He's given me responsibility, treats me like an adult instead of a criminal. And he's made me see what my sister sacrificed for me. The guilt he carried from knowing Valentina was living with a Mafia boss to save him. I'm sorry," Marco added, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Valentina, for putting you in this position. I know you're here because of me." "Marco," Valentina said gently, "I'm here because of you initially. But I stay because of me. I stay because, and this will sound crazy to you, but I love him. I love Dante. Not despite who he is, but for everything he is, the complexity, the contradiction, the man who tries so hard to be better, even when his world makes it almost impossible. A year after that fateful slap, after a year of living in Dante's world, of loving him and challenging him and growing with him, Valentina stood again on the balcony overlooking the bay. Dante joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," Valentina said, "about how a year ago I would have said this was impossible. That I, a respectable elementary school teacher, could never fall in love with a Kimura boss. That I could never live in this world, accept these complications. Yet here I am." "And do you have regrets?" Dante asked quietly. Valentina turned in his embrace to look at him. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I'm afraid every day that something will happen to you, that your enemies will take you from me. I'm afraid that one day you'll do something I can't forgive. I'm afraid this world will consume you completely." "But regrets?" "No, because you've shown me I can be stronger than I thought, that I can love more deeply than I imagined, that life isn't black and white, but infinite shades of gray." Dante kissed her, softly, reverently. "I love you," he said. "I know I don't say it enough. I know I show it poorly. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. And every day I try to be the man you deserve, even when I don't know if it's possible." "I know," Valentina said. "And I love you too. Even when it's hard, even when it scares me, even when the world judges us. I love you." That night, Dante asked Valentina to marry him, not with an elaborate ring or public proposal, just the two of them on the balcony under the stars, and the simple question, "Will you be my wife?" And Valentina, who had said yes to so many impossible things, said yes to another. Their wedding was a private affair, only immediate family and a few close friends. Marco walked Valentina down the aisle, proud and protective, and when Dante saw his bride, the tears in his eyes were real. They had no illusions that marriage would change them or make their life simpler. If anything, it complicated it further, officially tying Valentina to a dangerous world. But it was also a declaration, a choice to be family, to face whatever came together. Life after the wedding brought new challenges. Valentina became more involved in Dante's business, not in the criminal part, but in the legitimate side. She used her intelligence and ethics to expand the legitimate enterprises, slowly trying to shift the organization from pure crime to more legal operations. It wasn't easy. There were men in the organization who saw her as weakness, who tried to undermine Dante for letting her have influence, and there were dangerous moments, like when a rival tried to kidnap Valentina to use her against Dante. That day, Valentina saw Dante's darkest side completely. The men who had tried to take her were found dead in ways that made even hardened criminals shudder. And Dante, when he finally came back to her, was covered in blood, his eyes wild. "I killed for you," he said, his voice broken. "I did things I swore I wouldn't do anymore, and I did it because the idea of losing you, of someone hurting you, drove me insane. I'm a monster, Valentina. I'm exactly the monster you said I was." Valentina had wanted to run from him in that moment, to see the blood and violence, and remember everything that was wrong with this life. But instead, she did something that surprised them both. She had embraced him, held him tight while he cried, whispered that she understood, that she knew he did it to protect her. "I know who you are," she said. "I know what you're capable of. And I love you anyway. Not because I'm blind to the violence, but because I also see the man who tries, who changes, who wants to be better. You're monster and man, darkness and light. And I choose you, all of you." That moment cemented something between them. Dante stopped trying to hide his darker parts from her, and Valentina stopped pretending she could completely change him. Instead, they found balance, her pulling him toward light when she could, him protecting her from darkness when he had to. 2 years after the wedding, Valentina became pregnant. The news was joyful and terrifying together. Bringing a child into this world, raising a child as the son of a Camorra boss, seemed irresponsible. But when Dante put his hand on her stomach and felt their baby kick, when his eyes filled with tears, and he whispered they would protect this child with everything they had, Valentina knew they would find a way. Their son, whom they named Luca, was born in spring, and from the moment Dante held that small body, something in him changed. Fundamentally, I want him to grow up in a better world, he told Valentina in the hospital. I want him to have choices I didn't have. So I'll do what I have to do to make that possible. In the years that followed, Dante began a slow transition. He passed leadership of the criminal side of the organization to trusted lieutenants, while focusing on expanding legitimate enterprises. It wasn't a clean exit. He was still involved, still making decisions, but he slowly distanced himself from the worst violence. It was a process that lasted years, and there were moments when he backslid, moments when old habits returned. But the direction was clear. He wanted to build a legacy for his son that was more than fear and blood. Marco, having completed his 2 years of service, chose to stay working for Dante. But he worked completely on the legitimate side, eventually becoming manager of a construction company Dante had bought. He met a good girl, got married, built an honest life, and he was always grateful to his sister for the sacrifice she'd made to save him. Valentina, watching Luca grow, sometimes thought back to that night in the club, to the slap that had changed everything. If she had known then where it would lead her, would she have done it anyway? The answer was always yes, because despite the complications, despite the fears, despite the moments when she wanted to run, she had found a love she hadn't known was possible. She had found a man who really saw her, who valued her, who became better for her, and she had built a life that was hers, not the one society expected, but the one she had chosen. One night, 10 years after that slap, they stood again on the balcony. Luca was sleeping inside. Marco and his family had visited for dinner. The world seemed calm. "Do you remember?" Dante said. "When you hit me?" "Every day," Valentina said with a smile. "It was the stupidest and bravest moment of my life. It was the moment that saved me," Dante said seriously. "Because in that second, when I felt your hand on my face, when I saw you weren't afraid, I realized there were still people in the world who saw me as a man, not as a position, and I started wanting to be the man who deserved that look." "You're a better man now," Valentina said. "Not perfect, not close, but better." Dante laughed. "Low bar," he said. "Dante," Valentina corrected, "but real. You're a real man making difficult choices in an impossible world. And I love you for trying." They kissed as the city glowed below them. Two unlikely people who had built an unlikely life. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no perfect ending. There would still be challenges, still difficult moments, still days when they both wondered if they'd made the right choices. But they had each other, and that, they had learned, was enough. Valentina thought often about the lesson their story taught. It wasn't that love conquers all, or that a good woman can redeem a bad man. It was more nuanced than that. It was that people are complicated, that no one is only monster or only saint. It was that real love doesn't ignore flaws, but chooses to stay despite them, chooses to believe growth is possible. It was that sometimes the bravest choices don't look brave in the moment. They just look desperate or crazy or impossible. But looking back, you see they were exactly what needed to happen. If she hadn't hit Dante that night, if she hadn't agreed to stay with him, if she hadn't chosen to love him despite everything, life would have been simpler, but also less rich, less deep, less true. When Luca was 7, he began asking questions. "Dad, why do people look at you funny when we're in the city? Why do I sometimes see men with guns around our house? What do you really do for work?" Dante and Valentina had prepared for this moment, but it was still difficult. They decided on honesty, age-appropriate, but honest. "Luca," Dante said, kneeling in front of his son, "I do complicated work. Part is normal. We own shops and buildings. But part is less normal. I help people in the neighborhood, but sometimes I do things that aren't legal. And because of that, some people are afraid of me." "Are you bad?" Luca asked, his eyes wide. Dante looked at Valentina, then back at their son. "I try not to be," he said. "But I've done bad things, and I'm working every day to be better, especially for you and Mom. But you need to know, the world isn't black and white. People can do bad things and still be capable of loving, of changing, of trying." Luca thought about this. "Mom says you saved her," he said. "That when Uncle Marco was in trouble, you helped her. Is that true?" "It's true," Dante said. "But the complete truth is that she saved me too. She showed me I could be more than I thought I could be." "So you love each other?" Luca asked. "More than anything in the world," Valentina said, joining the conversation. "And we love you more than that." Luca seemed to accept this. "Okay," he said. "But Dad, can you promise you'll try to be good?" "I promise," Dante said, his voice full of emotion. "I promise I'll try every day." Raising Luca in that world was a constant challenge. Valentina insisted he attend normal school, not private school for children of crime families. She wanted him to have normal friends, normal experiences. Dante agreed, even though it meant more security risk. But they compensated by being incredibly careful, with protection always close, but invisible. And they talked to Luca constantly about choices, about how he could be different, about how he didn't have to follow his father's footsteps. When Luca was 10, Marco died in a construction accident. It was tragic, sudden, devastating. Valentina was destroyed, the guilt she carried heavy. She had saved Marco from death at Dante's hands, only to lose him anyway, just years later. During the funeral, as she looked at her brother's coffin, she wondered if all the sacrifice had been worth it. Dante held her while she cried, not trying to offer empty platitudes. He was just there, solid, constant. And when it was too hard to face the world, he faced it for her, handled everything, let her just grieve. "You know what Marco told me," Valentina whispered one night weeks after the funeral. "He said he was grateful. Grateful for the second chance you gave him. Grateful for the years he had to grow and change. He said that even if he died young, at least he died as a good man instead of as a criminal." Dante held her tighter. He was a good man, he agreed, and he'd be proud of the man he became. Marco's death changed something in Valentina. It made her more determined to ensure Dante's life became completely legitimate, that Luca never grew up in the shadow of criminality, and she pushed Dante harder than ever to fully transition. It was a long process. Dante was now 42, Valentina 34. They had built a life together, survived challenges that would have destroyed most couples, but there were still moments when Dante's world threatened to overwhelm them, like when an old enemy got out of prison and swore revenge, or when one of Dante's lieutenants tried a power play and Dante had to respond with force. But through it all, they stayed together. And slowly, very slowly, things improved. Over time, when Luca was 15, Dante finally managed an almost complete transition. He was no longer actively involved in criminal operations. He had passed everything to others. He still had influence, still had respect from the streets, but he no longer made decisions that ended in blood. It was a transformation that had taken 15 years, but it was finally real. And when he looked at his life, he saw not just a past of violence, but a future of possibilities. He saw a son who was growing up well, with strong values and a good head. He saw a wife who had challenged him to be better every day of their marriage, and he saw himself, no longer just boss or monster, but a man who had made terrible choices and still managed to find redemption. Valentina, watching Dante interact with Luca, teaching their son how to be a good man, felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. The road here had been horrible at times. It had required compromises that still hurt to think about, but it had also brought love, family, a life full of meaning. If I could go back, Dante said one night as they stood on their balcony, the spot that had become their place. I wouldn't go back and not meet you, even knowing how difficult it would be, how much pain it would cause. I'd choose you again. Me too, Valentina said. Every time. I'd choose you. They kissed as the city breathed below them. Two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely way, and had built something beautiful from foundations of violence and fear. The story wasn't one of easy redemption or perfect love. It was a story of imperfect people making difficult choices, of a man trying to be better, of a woman choosing to see humanity in a monster. It was a story about how real love isn't blind to flaws, but sees them and chooses to stay anyway. About how courage sometimes looks crazy. About how strength sometimes means being vulnerable. It was a story that began with a slap and became a whole life together. And maybe that's the most important lesson, that our moments of greatest courage don't always look heroic. Sometimes they look desperate, crazy, impossible. But when we see what they build, when we see where they lead, we understand they were exactly what was needed. When Luca was 18 and ready for university, he had a conversation with his parents. He'd been avoiding, "I want to know," he said. "I want to know the real story of how you met. Everything, not just the sweetened version." Dante and Valentina exchanged glances. They had always known this moment would come, the moment when their son wanted the complete truth. "Okay," Valentina said. "But it's a complicated story, not a simple love story." They told him everything, how Marco had stolen from Dante, how Valentina had come to beg for her brother's life, how she had hit Dante in front of his men, how he had said she would sleep in his bed, how that was threat and promise together, how in the weeks and months that followed, they had learned each other, had fallen in love despite every reason they shouldn't, and how that love had changed them both, pushing them both to be better. Luca listened to it all, silent and attentive. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. So, he finally said, "Mom, you were essentially a hostage. And Dad, you were a criminal who took her. How is that different from kidnapping?" "It's a fair question," Dante said. "And honestly, the first days, it wasn't very different. I used power against her. I used her love for her brother as leverage. But what it became after, that was choice. It was her choosing to stay when she could leave. It was us choosing to build something real. I don't excuse how it started," Valentina said. "It's problematic. It's complicated. But what we built from those foundations, that's real. And I've never regretted the choice to stay." "Are you happy?" Luca asked. "Truly?" "Look at me," Valentina said, taking Dante's hand. "Look at the life we've built, the family we have. Yes, Luca, I'm happy. Not every day, not every moment. But in sum, yes." "And you, Dad?" Luca asked. "Are you a better man now?" "I try to be," Dante said. "But don't delude yourself, Luca. I'm not a saint. I've still done terrible things. But your mother gave me a reason to try to be better, gave meaning to the effort. And that's a gift I can never repay." Luca nodded slowly. "I think," he said, "what your story tells me is important for me to remember. It says people can change, but only if they choose to. It says love doesn't excuse evil, but can inspire good. And it says, life isn't simple, people aren't simple, and that's okay. Exactly, Valentina said, proud. You've understood. When Luca left for university, the house felt empty. For the first time in 18 years, Dante and Valentina were alone together, just as they had been at the beginning. And strangely, it was like starting courtship again. They rediscovered each other, who they were without the role of parents dominating. And they found they still liked each other, still challenged each other, still chose each other. Years continued to pass. Dante, now in his 50s, gray hair at his temples, body still strong, but with scars of a life lived hard. Valentina in her 40s, still beautiful, perhaps more so because beauty came from confidence and wisdom. They had survived so much together. Marco's loss, constant threats from Dante's world, challenges of raising a son, and they were still together, still in love. One evening, 25 years after that slap, they celebrated the anniversary of their meeting. Not their wedding anniversary, but the anniversary of that night at the Inferno Club. They had made it a tradition to celebrate, to remember where they started. Do you remember what you thought when I hit you? Valentina asked, sipping wine on their balcony. I thought you were crazy, Dante said with a laugh. I thought you were dead, I thought. Who is this woman who has no fear? And then what? Then I thought, Dante said, his voice becoming serious, that you were the most interesting person I'd met in years. Everyone else either feared me too much, to be honest, or wanted something from me. But you looked at me like I was just a man. Just an irritating man who deserved a slap. And I fell in love with you in that moment. Not immediately, not completely. But the seed was planted. I didn't expect to love you, Valentina said. I thought you'd be a monster. I thought I'd hate you. I am a monster, Dante reminded. It's just that you love me anyway. You're a man, Valentina corrected. A man who's done monstrous things, but also a man capable of loving, changing, growing. And that's who I choose to see. That night, when they slept, Valentina dreamed of that first night in Dante's bed, how they had been strangers, trying to understand each other, how they were then so different from now, yet essentially the same. Still two people choosing each other through complication. The next years brought new joys. Luca graduated university, found an honest job in finance, met a good girl, and when he announced he was engaged, Dante cried. His son would have a normal life, a life he could never have. When Luca married, it was a beautiful ceremony in an ancient Naples church, and when Don Dante Moretti walked down the aisle with his family, some of the guests whispered, recognizing his reputation. But most saw just a proud father and the wife he loved, a couple who had built a life against all odds. During the father-son dance, Luca said something that made Dante cry again. Thank you, Dad, he said, for trying to be better, for showing that men can change, for loving Mom the way you did. You gave me an example, even if imperfect. You were the man you needed to be. I wasn't a good man, Dante said. But I tried to be a good father, he said. And that has to count for something. It counts for everything, Luca assured him. When Valentina was 50 and Dante 58, they received news they would become grandparents. And when they held their granddaughter for the first time, a little girl they named Julia after Valentina's paternal grandmother, they both felt something complete in them. This is legacy, Dante said, looking at the tiny baby. Not the crimes I committed, not the fears I inspired, but this, the family we built. That's what counts. Valentina looked at the man she had slapped all those years ago, the man who had become everything to her. Did you ever think, she said, that night at the club, that we'd end up here? Never, Dante admitted. I thought maybe it would end with your hatred, or my death, or both. I never imagined this. Family, peace, lasting love. How did you know to stay? He asked. Not for the first time, but in a new way. How did you know it was worth it? Through all the evil I did, all the pain I caused. I didn't know, Valentina said honestly. There were many days I wanted to leave. Many nights I cried over the choices I'd made. But then I'd look at you, see how you tried, how you changed, even incrementally. And I realized that love isn't about a perfect person, but about a person who chooses to grow. You chose to grow every day. For me, for Luca, for yourself. That was enough. And you, Valentina asked, how did you let me change you? It must have been scary, letting someone see your weaknesses. It was terrifying, Dante admitted. My whole life I'd learned that vulnerability is death, that showing weakness invites betrayal. But with you, I discovered something new. That vulnerability with the right person isn't weakness, but strength. That being truly seen, all of you, and still loved, that's the most precious gift. They watched granddaughter Julia sleep. So peaceful, so innocent. This baby will never know me as Don Moretti, Dante said. To her, I'll just be grandpa who tells stories and spoils her. And that makes me happier than any power I ever had. Promise me something, Valentina said. When we go, when our time comes, promise me our story won't be romanticized. I don't want someone telling it like a fairy tale. It was messy, it was complicated, it was problematic. But it was ours. It was real. And that's what counts. I promise, Dante said. We'll tell the truth, always, the messy, complicated truth. Their final years together were quiet, peaceful. Dante fully retired from all crime, lived the life of a grandfather who spoiled grandchildren, of a husband who adored his wife. Valentina continued managing their legitimate enterprises, ensuring the legacy they left was clean, and every evening they returned to their balcony, their place, and watched the city that had witnessed their impossible story. One night, when Dante was 70 and his health was beginning to fail, he lay in bed, holding Valentina's hand. I'm afraid, he admitted, his voice weak. Not of death, but of leaving you. Of not being here to protect you, to love you. Valentina squeezed his hand, tears flowing. You've already given me a whole life of love, she whispered. You've given me family. You've given me purpose. You've shown me that courage can come from the most unlikely places. I can't be sad for what we shared, only grateful it happened. Do you still love me? Dante asked, like a child seeking reassurance. Even now, even as I'm weak and sick. Still? Valentina said, laughing through tears. More. I love you more now than any other moment, because now I see the total sum of the life you lived, the changes you made, the love you gave. I see not just the monster you were, or the saint you tried to be, but the real man who did better than he could. And that, I love that more than anything. Dante died peacefully 2 weeks later, holding Valentina's hand, surrounded by family, and the last thing he said was thank you. Thank you for the slap that changed my life. After his death, Valentina found a letter he had written for her, to be read after he left. It read, My beloved Valentina, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I hope I went peacefully, surrounded by love I didn't deserve but was given anyway. I want to say things I maybe didn't say enough in life. First, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the fear I caused at the start of our story, for the way I used power against you, for every tear you shed, because of choices you had to make because of me. I don't excuse it. I don't forget it. I carry that with me wherever I go. Second, thank you. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for challenging me to be better. Thank you for staying when every reason said to go. Thank you for giving me family, for giving me purpose beyond power, for showing me that redemption, even imperfect, is possible. And third, I love you. I love you in ways I didn't know a heart could love. I love you for your strength, your courage, your willingness to fight for what's right. I love you for seeing me as a man when the world saw me as a monster. I love you for being mother to our son, grandmother to our grandchildren, partner through everything. Our story isn't a simple fairy tale. It's complicated, messy, full of choices others will judge. But it's ours, and I wouldn't change anything, except maybe make it longer, have more time with you. I've well, my love. Live without guilt, without regret. Tell our story if you want, the complete truth. Let others learn that people can change, that love can exist in unlikely places, that sometimes the greatest courage is choosing to stay when every reason says to go. And when your time comes to join me, I hope to find myself waiting, ready to tell stories of the life we live together. Until then, I'm yours, always Dante. Valentina cried reading it, but they were mixed tears. Sadness for loss, but also joy for life shared. She had lost the man she loved, but she had had the privilege of loving him, changing him, being changed by him. She lived another 15 years after Dante's death, years filled with grandchildren and prospering businesses and quiet satisfaction. She told their story, honestly, to those who asked. She didn't sweeten the difficult parts, didn't excuse the problems, but she also celebrated the real love, the real growth, the real change that happened. And when she died, peacefully in her sleep at 85, she was found with Dante's letter still near her heart. Their story became legend in the Naples quarters, the story of the Don who was changed by a teacher's love. Some romanticized it, some criticized it, but those who knew the truth understood it was nothing so simple. It was a story about choice, about choosing love over fear every day, growth over stagnation, hope over cynicism. It was a reminder that no one is only monster or only saint, but a complicated combination of both. And perhaps most importantly, it was a story that showed courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is a hand raised in a slap when every instinct says, run. Sometimes it's the decision to stay when every reason says, go. Sometimes it's believing people can change even when the world says it's impossible. Luca, now a middle-aged man with his own adult children, often reflected on his parents' legacy. He sat on that same balcony where they had spent countless evenings, watching the city they had loved. What do you think their story taught? His daughter asked, a young woman now with her own questions about life and love. I think, Luca said, it taught that real love isn't easy. It's not princess saved by prince. It's not perfection. It's two imperfect people choosing to be better together than they would be alone. It's seeing darkness in someone and also seeing light. It's not excusing evil, but believing in the capacity to grow beyond it. He paused, then continued. Grandma Valentina did something impossible. She loved a man who was literally a criminal, a man who caused fear and pain. But she also saw the man who read Dostoevsky, who cried holding his baby, who every day tried to be better than the day before. And Grandpa Dante, he also did something impossible. He changed, really changed. Not perfectly, never completely, but enough that when he died, he was no longer the monster he started, as he was a man who had learned to love, protect, sacrifice for family. But wasn't it problematic that the story started the way it did? His daughter asked. That she was essentially forced to stay initially? Yes, Luca said honestly. That was problematic. There's no way around it. The first months, weeks maybe, it wasn't a love story, but a story of power misused. But what's interesting is what they chose after. Grandma could leave once Uncle Marco was safe. Grandpa offered her that. But she chose to stay. And that choice, made freely, that changed everything. It transformed from a problematic situation to something real. It doesn't excuse the beginning, he explained, but it shows that the end, the direction people grow, that counts too. People aren't just their worst moments or their best moments. They're the sum of choices they make through a whole life. His daughter nodded, thinking. So the lesson is, choice matters, that people are complicated. Both, Luca said. And also this, I think, that when we tell stories, we have to tell the complete truth, not the sweetened version where everything's romantic and perfect, but also not the version where everything's condemned and horrible, the messy, contradictory truth that people and love and life are all incredibly complicated. They watched the city together, younger generation and older, carrying forward a legacy built on impossible choices and improbable love. And perhaps this, Luca thought, is the real lesson. Not that anyone should replicate his parents' story, not that violence can be excused by love, not that the ends justify the means, but that people are capable of extraordinary growth when given the right reason. That love, real love, sees everything and chooses to stay anyway. That courage isn't absence of fear, but action, despite it. That evening, as the sun set over Naples painting the bay in gold and purple, Luca felt his parents' presence. Not literally, not really, but in the way love leaves imprints, the way people you loved never completely leave you. He thought about the slap that changed everything, about the words that followed. "You'll sleep in my bed tonight." He thought about how what began as a threat became a promise, how fear became love, how two impossible people found a way to be together when the world said it was impossible. And he understood that their real legacy wasn't possessions or businesses or even grandchildren, though all of that counted. Their real legacy was this: they had shown that change is possible, that monsters can learn to be men, that victims can become survivors and then thrivers, that love can bloom in the most unlikely soil. They had shown that life isn't a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but a series of choices. Every day, every moment, choosing who you want to be. And they had chosen, through everything, to be together, to be family, to be better. Naples breathed beneath him, a city of contradictions and beauty, the city where their unlikely story unfolded. And Luca smiled, thinking maybe that's the final point. Not that everything was perfect, or that every problem was solved, but that through all the complication, through all the difficulty, love was real, choice was real, change was real, and that had to be enough. There's a profound difference between courage and recklessness, between love and stupidity, between redemption and excuse. Valentina Russo learned all these distinctions the moment her hand met Dante Moretti's face, the moment that changed both their lives forever. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, complicated, full of problems some will never forgive. But it was also real. It was also love. It was also proof that people, even those from the darkest places, can choose light. And maybe, after all, this is the only kind of story worth telling. Not the one where everything's perfect, but the one where nothing is perfect yet people try anyway. Where failures and successes mix together, where monsters learn to be men, where teachers discover the most important lesson is knowing when to stay and fight for something worth fighting for. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul.